Jeg er klar. Kan du prøve at sige noget, Thomas?
Hvad siger du?
Godt, den virker.
Hallo.
Test.
Test. 5.
Perfect. So the sound is working. Welcome everybody. This session will be in English only, so there is no translation. It will be about the Arctic. So we are, expanding the scope, not speaking about the Commonwealth, rigsfællesskabet. We are speaking about the Arctic as a whole and where Greenland and the kingdom is located in the Arctic region. And my name is Mads Kvist Fredriksen. I'm the executive director of the Arctic Economic Council, which is an international business organization based in Tromsø. So, and I will be moderating this panel with the permanent secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Greenland, Meningua Kleist, and the Arctic ambassador from the Kingdom of Denmark, Thomas Winkler. And what we will try to do is try to give you first, there will be some few opening remarks, and then we will speak generally about the Arctic and a little bit about, Greenland's role in the Arctic Council for those of you that don't know exactly where Greenland fits into this whole Arctic agenda. And then what we will do is we'll try to split the conversation into 3 parts. So we will speak about Russia first, because that's on top of mind for many people. Then we will move over to North America. We'll speak about Canada, the US, the relations with the kingdom, with those. And then if we have time, we'll move to the Nordic region and the Nordic Arctic. Because my belief is that there's more than just one Arctic. There's a very, very big difference from being here in Nuuk to being in Anchorage in Alaska, or Iqaluit in Nunavut, or being in Murmansk, or being in Tromsø. It's very, very different Arctic. And also the policies and the regulations is very, very different from if we talk about Russia or if we talk about, let's say, Iceland. So that's what we will try to cover in this session. We will have a conversation for around an hour or so, and then we will open up the floor for questions. And if any of you have any good questions as well, in the end of this, we have to come up with 2 questions for the politicians afterwards, for the chairman of the parties afterwards. And I think it would be a little bit strange for these 2 people to come up with questions for the Greenlandic politicians. So if we get any good questions from the room, that will be very much appreciated. Or else I will come up with any questions. But we'll start out with an opening remarks from Meningua Kleist, the permanent secretary. So the floor is yours.
Yep. Thank you, Mads. I'll take these off. I got that age now. Thank you, Mads, and thank you, Thomas, also for being here. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today. It's always interesting to participate in events such as this, and here in Greenland. Sometimes I think people here forget that Greenland has its own Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has its own voice, but we do. Fortunately, today we are here in Nuuk and can participate even if the invitations are a little bit last minute. I notice all the flags in front of the venue representing the countries from which our guests today have come to visit Greenland. The increasing attention given to the Arctic has resulted in more countries wishing to visit and discuss Greenland. We welcome this. I'm happy that the COVID-19 pandemic has reached the stage where it's possible to have so many people from around the world gathered in Nuuk. I can tell you, our ministry can feel that the world is opening up again and realize the potential of Greenland we've always known existed. It is a changed world that is emerging now, as Minister Motzfeldt said in her speech earlier today. We are relearning and learning to navigate a world where it has become more important to work closer with allies and friends. A world where we must be more vigilant in ensuring our well-being and democracy. The Arctic is not exempt from the changes not the geostrategic changes, not the economic changes, and certainly not the climate changes. But we need to honor the history of the Arctic as a zone of low tension and cooperation, where our indigenous peoples have been at the forefront in maintaining and increasing the dialogue of all Arctic states, including in the Arctic Council. The government of Greenland condemns the unprovoked and appalling Russian attacks on the democratic state and people of Ukraine. Greenland will impose EU sanctions towards Russia and Russian entities. This is the first time that Greenland makes such a move. That said, now more than ever, we must also avoid any possibilities of escalation due to misunderstandings and work together on solving the issues that are common to all the peoples of the Arctic. As a region with its own agency and agenda stepping onto the world's stage, the world is beginning to understand that the Arctic is not a frozen wasteland that is thawing, but a land of indigenous peoples, Arctic peoples, coexistence, and a long history of cooperation that can be an example for the rest of the world. More and more people are looking to Greenland and the Arctic, and it's up to us to make real the potential here that there is in the attention. It is the government of Greenland's priority in international affairs to increase our formal trade relations internationally with our friends, starting with a trade agreement with the UK, which we are currently in the process of negotiating. We have restarted the joint committee with the United States that is working to increase trade and cooperation between our two countries. The EU is planning to open a representation in Greenland this year. Our friends from Iceland were the first to recognize the potential of Greenland and will celebrate 10 years having a consulate in Greenland next year. The US reopened their consulate 2 years ago. And to our Canadian friends, where are you? Greenland is not short on friends and allies, and we're working on creating deeper and better cooperation among all our Arctic friends. Many of the challenges in the Arctic, it's not possible to tackle alone. We must work together. Climate change brings with it many challenges in Greenland, where due to warmer winters, the sea ice is later and less stable. There's more maritime traffic due to the lack of sea ice and the inclement winter weather increasing the risk of accidents. This sounds a little bit strange saying this after such a winter we've had, but the unpredictability is something we all know and have seen, especially here in Greenland, but I also know from friends in other countries it's the same. As Minister Motzfeldt mentioned, we signed an agreement on Arctic capabilities on May 10th with Denmark, and the agreement focuses on enhancing our ability to see what is happening in and around Greenland. It is clear that we need to enhance our abilities to maintain our domain awareness, and it is the opinion of the government of Greenland that this can also be achieved with civilian and civilian-like capabilities. We will continue to make the Greenland voice heard and ensure that the opportunities are realized with Greenlandic participation and the challenges are met with Greenlandic contribution. With that, I look forward to our discussions here today. Qujanaq.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And now over to Thomas Winkler, who used to be the former ambassador of Denmark to Canada and to Russia. So I think the two Arctic states, and one of them is very much in the news these days, and it's also impacting his current work as the Arctic ambassador to the Kingdom of Denmark. So your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mads, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. I've prepared a very long PowerPoint, but Mads has told me I'm not allowed to use it, so I will only sort of read from it, and it was supposed to come up there, but it will. Good. I will use some parts of it. As Mads said, I'm the Arctic ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark, I'm the senior Arctic official in the Arctic Council of the Kingdom of Denmark. And I will start by letting you into the engine room of my department, but also to calm Mr. Lidegaard a little bit, because he seemed to sort of call for cooperation between Greenland and Denmark on the Arctic. And I think we have a lot of cooperation on the Arctic. And I would say every time I say something on the Arctic, it's coordinated with Nuuk and Tórshavn. Whenever we go to a meeting, we have 3 chairs. We still have at the moment. There has been periods when that has been a challenge, but at the moment, there are always 3 of us. We had an informal dinner the other day in another country, and there were 3 chairs for the Kingdom of Denmark. So at least in my book, we have a very strong cooperation on the Arctic, so Mr. Lidegaard should not be that worried about that part. Apart from being this very noble Arctic ambassador, I'm also heading a department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs dealing with the Arctic, with North America, our bilateral relationship with the United States and Canada, and a lot of foreign policy issues with Greenland and the Faroes. So the Arctic is in normal times a relatively small part of my work, but of course these days it takes up a lot of space, because the only thing that really interests us is the Arctic after 24th February. And I know you've heard a lot about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but for those of us who are sitting, let's say, in the engine room in the Arctic Council, it has had a dramatic impact on our work. And I have 3 short headlines, or short points, so to speak, because it's all under one headline, and that is, much have changed in the Arctic, but not all. Note the last part, not all have changed in the Arctic. And that is something that differentiates the Arctic from almost all other places where Russia somehow is taking part in an international organization. I don't know if anybody read the news today, but Russia has now left the Council of Baltic Sea States, the same way they left the Council of Europe when they were suspended from both these organizations. This has not happened in the Arctic, and we all have an ambition that this should not happen. I think this was sort of my headline. My first point is, should the people in the Arctic be more afraid of an armed conflict today than they were before 24th February? It sounds like an academic question, but it's actually a question I get a lot, both here and in Copenhagen. And of course, as Mr. Bill say, if we have a global armed conflict, it may also play out in the Arctic. So let's cross our fingers that we will not have a global armed conflict. But if we take that option out of the equation, I don't see a greater risk today of armed conflict in the Arctic than we had before 24th February. Of course, as Minuak also said, we have to, and we are already much more vigilant than we were before 24th February, but it's not because of a specific threat. So I'm happy to echo Naalakkersuisoq Vivian Motzfeldt in saying there is peace in Greenland, and there is peace in the Arctic at the moment. And then some would say, but there are Russians here. I would say, yes, there are Russians here, but as former ambassador to Moscow, it's very important also when trying to understand the Russians to get behind the headlines. And for those of you who have special interest in Russia's approach to the Arctic these days, I would strongly recommend you read the speech that President Putin did on 14th of April. And if you take away all the rhetoric about Nazism and all this stuff, what I read him saying is business as usual in the Arctic, seen from a Russian perspective. And with 20% of the Russian GDP, or perhaps today even more, originating from the Arctic, I still don't see Russia having an interest in conflict in the Arctic. And yes, some would say, especially those in uniforms, that Russia is totally unpredictable. Maybe they are at least not transparent, therefore we can't predict it beforehand. But I would still claim that there is a logic behind even what Russia is doing. It's a Russian logic, and it's very difficult to comprehend, but it's still there, and I don't see Russia going for a conflict in the Arctic. One of my other pet points, so to speak, and some have heard it before, and they're very tired of me saying, this is this question of the definition of the Arctic. I'm not going to put all up, I have a lot of good PowerPoints on this, but I won't put them up there. But one of the things I hear, also here in Nuuk, is, and in Copenhagen, but aren't we hearing all the time about more exercises in the Arctic, more military activity? Well, go down, as Peter Viggo Jacobsen, the Danish researcher, have done, and look at these exercises, and most of them, if not all of them, takes place off the coast of Norway. So we are not talking about, let's call it, I'm sorry, Minuak, our Arctic, but a North Atlantic Arctic. So let's be aware of that when we talk about the potential of conflict in the Arctic. Copenhagen, of course, fully share what Minuak said about the vision of low tension. I also think, and it's rarely I can stand up and praise the Danish defense because I'm a diplomat, but I will do that. That was not very diplomatic, was it? No. But I will do that anyway here because you've all, or many in the room, may have heard about Operation Mjølner, which is a good Danish name for a NATO exercise which took place off the coast of Norway last week. Go in and read how the Danish Defense Command presented this in their strategic communication, because that was a low-tension communication they did there. They said, this is not because of Ukraine, this is something we do regularly, and so on and so forth. So the ambition of low tension is not just words, it's also something we try to live up to in our daily doings. Then I would end this part. This was my first point, and I know I got 10 minutes, so I will speed up. The second part is very short, because I think we have to make the point that the risk of a civilian disaster in the Arctic is still bigger than the risk of an armed conflict. The risk of a cruise ship or an oil tanker, you know the scenarios, which brings me to the second point, which is a complete copy of yours, Minuak, because all the other challenges in the Arctic are still there. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget we have, as you said, climate change, we have the need for economic development, we have the access to resources, and so on and so forth, and they are still here in the Arctic, regardless of what's happening elsewhere in the world. So I don't know if you said it that clearly, Minuak, but I think there is still a need for Arctic cooperation. And we need to get the Arctic cooperation up and running again. Which brings me to my third and final point, and now you can see very quickly all my slides, because I have to go. Where are sorry. Where are we with the Arctic Council today? The activities of the Arctic Council is on pause, while we consider modalities for the work to continue. This is what we, which are representative of a group of 7 states in the Arctic. And some of you say, why is he speaking like that? And say, this is what diplomats do when we are not saying the A7. There is no A7. This sounds like a film. Huh? There is no new steps. There are there is no A7. But there is a group of 7 Arctic states who sit down and discuss the modalities for our future cooperation in the Arctic. And we have 3 basic considerations. We want to make a clear stance against Russia. This is not because of the Arctic, it's because of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. We want the Arctic Council to remain the institution of Arctic cooperation, also in the future. And this is where, when you read the speech of Mr. Putin on 4th of April, you will see why we have some concerns there, because he talks about how about Russia cooperating with other non-Arctic states on the Arctic. So there is a need to maintain the Arctic Council as the institution, but we also, as you also hinted to, Minuak, those activities that the Arctic Council do undertake to the benefit of the people of the Arctic, including the indigenous peoples, they need to get up and running. At the moment, literally nothing is happening. No project, no contacts, no meeting, no nothing. We need to restart something. And this sounds perhaps to some of you very, very easy. I can assure you it is not. It's not, because Russia is still an indispensable part of Arctic cooperation. Talk about the impact of permafrost without including Russia in the Arctic, and you get a false picture. So there is a challenge on how Russia simply is in the Arctic. We also have a separate challenge, which is only in the Arctic Council, and that is that Russia currently holds the chairmanship of the Arctic Council, which makes it very, very complicated to get it up and running again without Russia. So it's complicated, and now I'm finishing, Mads, so don't hit me. They are incredibly difficult balances that we have to meet between these states talking about it, and there is much thinking and an enormous amount of talking taking place, but I'm quite confident that not only do we have to, we will restart the Arctic Council in one form or the other within a foreseeable future, without Russia. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to respond. Thank you very much for that, Thomas. And I think for those of you that don't know, all the details about the Arctic Council, celebrated its 25th anniversary last year. The group of 8 Arctic states sitting and talking about science, and the 6 permanent participants, which are the various indigenous organizations, based in Tromsø, where I'm living at the moment. And I'm curious, in this Arctic Council, the organization has changed a lot in the past 25, 26 years. What is the role of Greenland, and what has been the biggest change in recent years in the Arctic Council?
One of the major changes is, of course, the attention on climate change. The increased focus, the increased scientific number of projects, the increased political focus, and also the observers' focus on climate change. And what the role the Arctic has within the whole dynamics and mechanisms within the global climate change. And in that setting, of course, Greenland is within meteorology and what have you, and sea currents and all these things, one of the drivers that are important to take into consideration here. And that, of course, means that Greenland has to be more present, or is more present in projects. We have to be more aware and attentive, because many of these projects go on here in Greenland, and we also need to know what goes on here on our island. So that is a very important part of it. Then, of course, the general increased focus on the potentials and possibilities of the Arctic, which has meant that the political level also of the participation at the meetings, political meetings, have risen, and media's attention. I remember 20 years ago, you would almost not notice that there was an Arctic Council meeting if you were outside of the Arctic. In many cases, if you were inside the Arctic, you wouldn't notice either. So that has completely changed in those years. And of course, Greenland's along the way also becoming self-governing within the Kingdom of Denmark, also has increased the competences and also the need to participate in the discussions, to form the discussions and be part of it, and have our voice heard within the Council, but also within the Kingdom. And that, of course, is something we continuously do, basically every day.
In close collaboration with within the whole kingdom, as we heard Thomas says. Yeah. Thomas, a part of my work is reading through all these wonderful Arctic strategies, and we will get back to the kingdom and also the Greenland foreign strategies and Arctic strategies. And recently, Finland came up with a strategy defining the whole of Finland as an Arctic state. They said you cannot talk about certain regions being Arctic or non-Arctic. Is the whole of the kingdom an Arctic state, so to say, an Arctic partner?
Yeah, I thought you would forget this question, but I mean, I'm not quite sure what the right answer is. I mean, you can make a formal answer and say it's the Kingdom of Denmark that's a member of the Arctic Council. So in that sense, the whole kingdom is an Arctic state. But I also think I could quote the Prime Minister from the meeting of 10th June that Denmark, understood as this little dot down there close to Europe, is of course not in the Arctic, as she said, which is geographically correct. So the kingdom is an Arctic state because Greenland is in the Arctic, and the Faroes have access to Arctic waters and so on. But so it's a yes but answer. I think is the right question, the right way to put it.
Fair enough. Meaning,
Of course, I agree. The kingdom is, of course, much different from Finland geographically and politically. So there are differences to make there. And I think I wholly agree with Thomas.
It's good.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I want to just briefly talk about, very briefly, the opportunities in the Arctic. Because we heard, on stage, we heard the various Nalakasui mentioning, all the opportunities in Greenland. But if we look a bit broader, look at the Arctic as a region, where we already heard about the challenges, obviously being climate change. We heard about demographics. I think there's a agreement that demographic is a challenge. But where are the opportunities? In an Arctic context, where does Greenland see the opportunities for the region?
The opportunities right now in the region, of course, first of all, we have to safeguard the Arctic Council. It has to be protected. We have to make sure that it continues in one way or the other. But with what we're seeing with climate change, with the political attention on the Arctic, but also within the Arctic on the opportunities between neighbors, looking at each other. Greenland with Iceland, and Iceland on Greenland, and Greenland hopefully with Canada, and Canada hopefully with Greenland, and US and Greenland, and so forth. All of those things, those dynamics, I think, is something that will develop even further, and might even in the future lead to a stronger Arctic Council after we've passed this crisis we have here. I think there is a very big appetite for cooperating among neighbors, because it's been so difficult to travel between each other that along with industrial projects, along with academic projects, tourism and what have you, there will be more routes between us, traveling routes, passenger routes and infrastructure and all these things, communication lines and what have you. And therefore, especially from Greenlandic side, we want to cooperate more with Iceland. We want to cooperate more with Canada. We want to cooperate more with Alaska, US.
On any particular issues, any particular sectors, or is it just more collaboration for the sake of collaboration?
No. Basically everything. Basically everything. Just like in Europe, in EU, you have so many areas where neighboring countries cooperate because it makes sense within environment, within social issues, within transport. Within industrial and trade and areas and so forth. I don't think we should try to set too many limits, but rather look at opportunities and then try to see how can we actually develop these.
And I think this question or answer makes a lot of sense sitting here in Greenland. You want to work with your near markets. That's what all countries do. Sitting in Copenhagen, where are the opportunities for the Arctic region? Because we don't have mines in Denmark, so it's a little bit weird to say.
We have one salt mine.
We have one salt mine and some calcium.
Doesn't make any money, but
where's the Arctic opportunity?
Well, I think Mr. Bill showed us this interesting Chinese map, and I think, and it links to what you're saying, Ninok. I think the first thing that will really open up is transport. It's sea transport, and that requires cooperation. That requires that we have a search and rescue and oil preparedness, but also that we have modern fuel for the ships, and we're back to the power to X model. So I'm quite sure that transport, and as everybody in the room know, Denmark does have some rather large companies in this sector. So I think sea transport will be the first. Of course, there will be on minerals and resources, but they're mainly within national jurisdictions, right? So it's not necessarily a matter of other than commercial cooperation. But sea transport, the states need to work together, both in the positive sense. So we make them all stop in Greenland to tank whatever it is they're going to tank, but also, of course, have the systems in place if something goes wrong.
And now I will move to the question that you two probably get the most from anyone. It's about the Arctic strategy. And before we get to the kingdom of Denmark's Arctic strategy, let's move to Greenland first, because there has been for the past 2.5 years, 3 years, talk about, we're going to have our own defense and foreign strategy before we can get a kingdom strategy for the Arctic region. Why don't we have it yet? I mean, it's been quite a lot of time, and a lot of things are going on. And as I said, it's been 2.5 years in the making now. What is holding up this the strategy from the Greenlandic government?
I think the key word here is a lot of things are going on. And with a lot of things going on, you need resources, and it takes time. And within the last 3-4 months, the world picture has completely changed. So along the way, the scenery has also changed. But we have started the process. But along the line, we also have a new coalition. So that we also need to make adjustments, and that's a political landscape. And but we are moving forward, and I believe our politicians will have more decisions and meetings in the next couple of months, and hopefully we'll get quite close to a Greenlandic foreign security policy.
And do you understand if some people in Denmark feel that, that Greenland is holding back on something that could have been decided? For those of you that don't know, the kingdom has a strategy that has a timeline on it, unfortunately. I think people regret putting those numbers in 2009 to 2020. So now we are in 2022. Mm. And some people from the political side maybe feels that Greenland is holding back, that the kingdom can make a strategy. Do you understand that worry, or should they just wait in Copenhagen until everything is decided here before we can move forward in Copenhagen?
I fully agree that we should move faster.
Okay.
Yes, I fully agree we should move faster. But one thing we also have to remember, we had the discussion earlier on that we need to keep our administration or make it smaller. Mm. In this particular area, no. I don't think so. We are extremely busy. Mm. Last week we had the UK here doing negotiations on trade. The first trade agreement we're negotiating. The same week we had our minister down in Denmark doing the Arctic capability. And we had people up in the Avanasua commune. And we have also the Prime Minister of Iceland coming this week, and we have this conference. We are only that many people that can cover all these areas. It's the same people that are the writers to these strategies after the politicians have their ideas and input. Mm. So it is a question of resources. Mm. But I think this strategy will also leverage the need for more resources. If you notice for the last 20 years or 15 years how the Arctic has risen on the agenda, the interest in Greenland has risen. Well, it doesn't take a long time to then figure out, okay, that must give more work for those working with foreign affairs. Mm. And I can confirm that is the case. So it's not because we don't want to be finished. I would love to have it finished tomorrow. Yeah. But we're only that many people.
You mentioned being busy as well these days. Similar, and also talking about resources. And the reason why I'm saying that is who is our allies right now? You talked about, both of you talked about coalitions, allies in the Arctic region, and sitting in Copenhagen, if we split it into the 3 Arctics that you might disagree with, but obviously, Russia, I doubt you will call them allies, but then you got the Nordics. Are they the like-minded, or are we using more to Canada and the US? Are they the like-minded? Because the voice very much from Greenland is North America. And if you hear your American colleagues, they always speak about Greenland, with Canada, with the US. Who is our like-minded and allies in the Arctic context?
That was another question I hoped he forgot. But I would just go back to the first, I mean, I was just saying, we're just waiting in Copenhagen. I mean, there may be some politicians here and there, but we will wait. And as we both said, we do have a joint approach to Arctic cooperation. I think a strategy is a good thing because it reaches further into the future, but it's not like we don't have a policy because we don't have a strategy. And of course, another point we clearly agree on is more resources to foreign affairs. That's a given. Who are our allies? Well, I mean, the diplomat would say it depends on the matter at hand. But of course, I mean, I would also look to my political masters, and there's no doubt in Copenhagen that our closest ally is the United States. And I would say today that is also, at least to a large extent, the case in the Arctic. It's not always been like that because the US approach to the Arctic have been, how should I put it diplomatically, shifting. I mean, they may at times not have been that interested, but they are now. So at least on the, let's call it the broad Arctic agenda, the US is a clear ally. But of course, we also have two Nordic countries who are also a member of the EU, like us. So we are, of course, interested. We are working together with Sweden and Finland very closely towards the EU when it comes to Arctic questions to avoid the worst mistakes by the European Union in regard to their approach to the Arctic. So in that regard, when we're talking what should the EU prioritize in the Arctic, then Sweden and Finland are, of course, very, very close allies. So I don't think you can, I don't accept your division into three, but let's not talk about.
There's no Arctic 7, but you just mentioned 7 countries being the allies, and
yeah, but that's not the same as A7. No. It's two different things, because there is an A8. I think, and I would be happy to repeat it, Russia has a chair at the Arctic Council. There is issues that, I don't know, that's a too soft a word. I mean, the way she's behaving in Ukraine does that she cannot be in that chair, but she still has the chair. So it is the group of 7 Arctic states who are discussing it.
Let's move into Russia and the Arctic. And just one question follow-up for that is this, for many years, and a lot of researchers have been talking about this Arctic exceptionalism. There could be war around the world, but peace and love and understanding will be in the Arctic region. High north, low tension, yada, yada, yada. We've heard that for many years. And now we paused the Arctic Council. Is that, do you believe this? I know it's an academic discussion, but this Arctic exceptionalism, is that still there? Is the Arctic still unique from conflicts around the rest of the world?
I think it is to some extent, and I think that's also what we've both been saying. I mean, we were definitely in 2014. Mm-hmm. The illegal annexation of Crimea had no impact on the cooperation in the Arctic Council, even though there was a harsh political reaction to Russia and sanctions and so on. As I said now, I mean, Russia is not suspended from the Arctic Council now, unlike all the other institutions. What we're just seeing, as we heard this morning also from Vivian Motzfeldt, it's just, this is another thing. I mean, Crimea was bad enough. The unprovoked invasion of a sovereign state is just on a completely different level. So that is why we cannot keep that. We cannot sit up in the Arctic and say, we didn't see this happen, and then keep on talking about sea transport. And sitting, I'm sorry to say, the chairman now of the Arctic Council is the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. I cannot imagine any of the ministers from the 7 other states sitting these days in a meeting with Lavrov and, smiling, talking about cooperation in the Arctic. That's not going to happen. This is a different. So there is an extent of exceptionalism still, but this is also so exceptional circumstances that we cannot maintain it 100%.
And then we have the challenge in Greenland, because this is a business conference. 14% of your export from Greenland goes to Russia. I mean, that's a big number for a small economy and for a small nation. How is the coordination with the kingdom? Because introducing the sanctions that probably most likely will happen on Thursday, introducing the sanctions will have an impact on Greenland, have an impact on the economy and so on. How is the coordination right now between your colleagues in Copenhagen and Tórshavn around these issues?
I think we say on there is daily contact on different levels. Of course, our politicians are in direct contact with each other when they need to, and when they want to address issues and ideas. But us in Foreign Affairs here are basically in daily contact with Foreign Affairs in Copenhagen. And when this conflict started, we were in contact with each other several times a day. And of course, we had to make our own decision on where we stood in this conflict. We have never been in a situation where we had to take such a clear stand. But I think it was clear for all in our political system when presented with the facts that there was no other way. So we had to take this position. We felt ourselves, and that's a very new thing for us. But I think we always knew who the allies were and that we were a part of it. But I think this decision, to the highest extent ever seen, has now shown that we are, in fact, part of this alliance, the Western Alliance. And of course it was a difficult decision. It was a very difficult situation we were in. And it's a difficult decision for all countries. Don't tell me it's not easy for Sweden, for Finland, for Germany, for Switzerland, all of those countries. But they made that decision. For Faroe Islands, where 25% of their, or more, of their exports go to Russia. So it's a difficult place to be in for everybody, but there is just a place where you cannot accept what you see, and it gets too close to some extent.
But you mentioned that with resources as well, and you mentioned it's a difficult decision, and it's a new time. And those are. Then you will also get difficult questions, and one of them will be, when do we start talking with Russia again? I mean, so when, let's say, Lavrov, he writes up your Nalakasuisak, Vivian, and says, I would love to come for a visit in Nuuk. You will probably say no now, I could imagine, but when would be okay to have the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia coming for a visit in Nuuk?
A first precondition will be stop the aggressions and the war in Ukraine, and they get all their territories back. That's a first precondition. Then we have to see other changes along the way, probably, or stabilization. And in that process, one thing that has been extremely important for us is to see what other countries, like-minded countries, do. So it's important for us to see what Iceland does, what Faroe Islands does, what Canada does, what the US does, what the EU does. And for Denmark as well, it's important that they stand together with the rest of the EU. So it's important that you follow some sort of playbook that can be recognized somewhere, so that you, in this situation where Russia, still being Russia, strong nation, cannot pick out the one specific country that went the extra mile, so to speak. So it's important to be in sync. So I cannot tell you right now when will be the right time for us to then sit again with Russia. The day will come, because they are part of the Arctic, and the Russian peoples of the Arctic are welcome within the Arctic Council, and we look forward to the day where we can sit together again and talk cooperation, and with scientific institutions. But as the situation is now, it's simply not, we cannot do that. So in that sense, I think there's been very, very good and important communications between us and Denmark. They have shared reports, we have shared reports, and that has been a help, I think, for both.
And just a final question on Russia before we move into North America. Staying in sync, it's been very impressive how, I mean, not only in the Arctic, but in the EU, in the West generally, it's been very much in sync. But how long can this go on for? And when, and here I especially mean the Arctic Council, countries disagree, also because of different locations. You have different opinions and of how big your economy is with Russia and so on. There's different opinions and different cultures and background. I mean, when will this pause start harming the Arctic Council too much because of internal disagreements and so on? Is that a risk? Or do you think
I don't know if the pause hurts the Arctic Council because of internal disagreements. The pause hurts because it's a pause and because it affects the activities of the Council. And you can only stop for so long and then pretend you can just move on as if nothing happened. So the pause, if we go to my third point out there, that we need to get the activities up and running for the benefit of the peoples of the Arctic, the pause cannot go on for long, because then the activities would die. And then it will be very, very difficult to restart projects and programs and so on. So that's about the pause. And I think, yes, there are some difference of views. There will always be between states. I think, as you also hinted to, Ninook and Mads, I mean, I think it's impressive we've been staying together. We're now into the third month, and not just in the kingdom, but almost globally. We've been staying together in this, and that, of course, is a purpose in itself, that we move on together. But at least my sense is that everybody, among representatives of the Foreign Ministry of the 7 states, we do agree that this pause is not sustainable for much longer. So that's why I concluded that we have to restart very soon.
So a year of this pause will definitely hurt.
We couldn't do that. No.
Yeah. Let's move to North America. For those of you that don't know, Greenland has representations in Beijing, in Reykjavik, in Brussels, Copenhagen, and then in Washington. You mentioned yourself that you are thinly staffed. I mean, every civil servant says that already, so you're not the only one saying that. But Greenland is still opening up new representations. You know, most recently in Reykjavik or Beijing. If you're so thinly staffed, and a lot of foreign policy you can get from the Danish government, like Trade Council, for example, it's in the law that Greenland is supposed to get all the help from the Trade Council as any other Danish companies, for example. Why is it that Greenland opens up more representation, and what is the importance of these representations?
Legitimacy and being able to represent yourself. Denmark could close all its embassies and be part of the EU representations all around the world. But that would not be satisfactory for Denmark, because you would then be competing with 20 or 26 other countries on the interests within and the perspectives and so forth. Now, when we go out and represent Greenland, then it's noticed. Then they know the other countries that we meet with, that they sit across someone who actually comes from Greenland, who knows Greenland intimately, not just from a piece of paper. Someone who's lived and breathed the air and lived the culture and what have you, know the society, knows the dynamics, knows the companies, knows the political landscape, all of these things. When we send out people, you can be rest assured they do know all of these things. Our Danish colleagues are experts on Denmark, of course, the kingdom as a whole, but they have not lived and breathed the society up here in the same way. So nothing against their qualifications or anything like that, but it's about who can actually do it.
But could one of your colleagues, could that person not be embedded or working in the Danish embassy?
In practice, what we do is we get a segment of the Danish embassies, and that becomes a Greenland representation. In some cases, we get our own entrance, but we have our coats of arms outside and our flag. So it is in connection with the Danish embassies, and we do cooperate with the Danish embassies. That cooperation can have different ways of going about. We have a way of doing things between the Greenland representation and the Danish permanent representation to the EU. That's one way of working with, and there's another way of working together in Washington, D.C. In Beijing, it's a third way. So you find your ways locally to set the right balance of things. And of course, because there are also different opportunities, different challenges, different cultures and approaches. But it is always of great value when we have our own representations out there. I experience also when I was in Brussels, I mean, if I am to speak with a representative from another country, I'd like to meet someone from that country that has lived and breathed that country and knows that country intimately. So when we sit and talk, and small talk, and in an unpredictable setting, I ask this and that question that perhaps is not on the subject. That person will be able to answer me. That is not possible if it was someone from another country. So you have to view it as something that is not just interchangeable with each other, that a Danish embassy might as well be a Greenlandic. No, it's because that has a different function and different set of people with another background.
Are there any plans of expanding and opening new representations from the political system?
I think our political segment here in Greenland is very interested in expanding it further. What it will be, I cannot say yet, but I suspect it will be part of the Greenlandic strategy, the foreign strategy.
That's good questions for the chairmen of the various parties, saying, you know, if Greenland should open up a new representation, where should it be? I think
I think we have usual suspects that we mention, and without any list of priorities, from my chair, one important area is Canada, our country, Ottawa. It's difficult to service Canada from Washington, D.C. Another important country right now is the UK, where we are right now negotiating a trade agreement with the UK. A third one is Japan, which is also one of the allies. So those three are very important.
Not Moscow at the moment.
Right now, I think then we have, of course, one can view at further down the line of periphery or perhaps even UN or what have you and all these things. So yeah.
And now a little bit easy question for you, because I think this might be relevant if there's any Greenlandic companies here. I think there's maybe not a full understanding in Greenland of what you can use the TC for, the Trade Council for. Because what is quite unique in the Commonwealth, in the Kingdom, is that the Faroe Islands don't have the rights for using the Trade Council funding, but Greenland and Denmark, you know, share that funding and those capacities and so on. Maybe you could just give a few words, elaborate a little bit. What is the role of the Trade Council in promoting Greenlandic companies, and how can Greenlandic companies use Trade Council?
Well, you just answered yourself. It's completely parallel with any Danish company. So if a Greenlandic company wants to export to, I know Russia, I almost said Russia, but I will not say Russia, but to Kazakhstan, they could, as any Danish company, contact the Trade Council covering Kazakhstan, and not only get the assistance from the commercial experts, but also get all these special kind of funding there is within the Danish Trade Council or the Minister of Foreign Affairs Trade Council system. So it's a service available at a fee for Greenlandic companies as well as for Danish companies.
And do you think the understanding in Trade Council of, I mean, just following up from what Mingo said about understanding the place you're representing, do you think there's a good understanding in Trade Council of Greenland as a business environment, you know, the business opportunities?
But the Trade Council is focused on exports of products, let's say, from Greenland. And the commercial officers would be experts in that sector.
But not from a non-EU state, you know, that's complexities and,
yeah.
I don't know if it's so different, unless it's a very unique Greenlandic product.
We have, it's of course open for our companies to utilize the services of the Trade Council. The Trade Council, of course, also operates under its own strategies, policies under the foreign affairs and so forth in Denmark. We, on our side, just need, when it comes to the government side, we just need to, before we go in deeper cooperation on these, we need to have our own strategies in place and have an overview of, okay, where is it we need to focus? In that sense also, when trying to create this overview, we need all the information on our trade, on our company's interests, and what plans they have and all these things, in order to form our own strategies on our export or foreign trade. But for that, we need to build up our own capacities. We need to build up the information we have, our statistics on our trade and what have you, and that is something that is becoming more and more. We see the need for all of this when we are to do these trade agreements that we are now negotiating. And we have to do these trade agreements ourselves. Denmark is part of the EU, does trade agreements through or with the EU. We are outside, so we have to do our trade agreements ourselves. In order to do that, we need information. We need to have a hold of what is the Greenland trade, what are the Greenland companies interested in, and what are the frameworks and so forth. So we need to some sort of have or develop our overview and access to information, and also improve our communication with the business community, especially that part of it that is interested in trade, or in trading, exporting, but also buying services or other things from other countries. And that is something we would like to develop. But companies, Greenlandic companies, are welcome to contact the Trade Council. But right now, we need to get our own house formed and built. And from there on, we see what can be done with regards to corporations and so forth.
And I can't help but adding that me and my colleagues are indoctrinating everybody we can get in touch with in the Danish Foreign Service to say, and now I look at my general consul in Toronto, right? If you have an issue regarding Greenland on the Faroes and you don't know what to do, contact my department in Copenhagen, and we will try to advise you the best we can, or put the question further up to Nuuk or Tórshavn. So it's not, we should not look at Trade Council as sort of an isolated unit just floating around there. I mean, they are linked up to the whole system of the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and all the expertise, including in Greenland and Faroe, and at least the expertise that we know, hopefully knows who to call in Nuuk with any specific question on a Greenlandic company or product.
So when you do, for example, trade tours or delegations to other countries and so forth, we are, of course, interested in having a strong branding of that delegation as being something from Greenland and the Arctic. That is important. And if you only have one or two companies part of a big Kingdom of Denmark delegation, you sort of lose that. But it does take resources and political will to want to organize these trips and initiatives. But I think it's there. We just need the resources to do it.
Yeah. Resources, and that leads me up to another question. So the EU is opening a consulate in Nuuk. 3 to 4 people is going to be hired from the EU. As we heard from the speech, Iceland already has one, and the US has 7 people working here in the consulate. And you are how many people in your department?
I think we are about, here in Nuuk, we are about 10, 12, 13, something like that.
So around the same number as just the EU and the US consulates are represented. Are you able to, how can I say, you have to focus somewhere, and I think trade is an important focus. Do you think that that's the reason, and it's many questions in one, but my final question is, the reason for the US opening a consulate, having 7 people working here, do you think that's for trade reasons they're here? Or why do you think they are so interested in moving 7 diplomats to Nuuk?
Probably not 7 diplomats, but 7
or
people.
7 staffs.
But no, we have our joint committee where we have corporations within science, education, trade, and so forth, mineral resources. So you have people within different sectors.
And what's the main interest for the Americans to come
I think
here?
you should ask the Americans on that. But I think on us, the Americans is a neighbor.
Yeah.
The US also is a guarantee for security here in Greenland. We have a defense agreement of 1951. The US has had a presence here for decades, and it's only natural that we have built on that relationship. We are neighbors, and it's unthinkable if you were in Europe that you didn't cooperate closely with your neighbors. That is something we'd like to develop with the US and with Canada and others. But it's the interest of the US. It's a superpower. It's the leading country in the world. And of course, what we are used to within the Kingdom of Denmark, the scale and manning and staff and all that, is not something you'll see reflected in the world superpower. There are more resources there. So that it's not strange that even in a small, remote place like Greenland, well, perhaps not so small and not so remote anymore, there are resources allocated to it. Because it's also an important part of well, U.S. defense, should anything happen. But also the U.S. sees the potentials in developing the relationship with us. And we see this as something that we've been talking about for decades. And there's nothing strange in that. And Greenland has so many potentials that not one country and opportunities that not one country can cover it all. Denmark cannot cover it all. The EU cannot cover it all. The US cannot. And in that setting, one should of course look at us in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But when you talk about science, we have our people in another ministry who work on science. If you talk on environment, you have people in other ministries that work on international affairs on environment. The same with education and mineral resources and so forth. So yes, the ministry is small. We hope it will grow. It could be double that. But the other ministries have their people as well. And they also do their part. So you have to take that into account. I mean, the Ministry of Fisheries and Hunting, they do their own bilateral agreements with other countries. So they have a large part of their ministry that only focus on that.
And let me just follow up, and we will open up. If you have any questions, raise your hands. I will just ask a follow-up question to this, because we talked about the sanctions being introduced. And I work with companies every day, and sanctions is one of the most complex legal things to deal with. You know, it's extremely complex, even for people who's been working with this for many years, especially in a time when EU is discussing their 6th sanctions package. Greenland being a non-EU state, maybe you'll just copy-paste. You will definitely adopt some sanctions that fits. I'm a small business owner in Dasilak, and a Russian fishing vessel comes in. It has some engine problems. It comes in and he asks, could you add on some fuel on my fishing vessel in Dasilak or Itukutomit? And this business, in theory, this man should know who is the last owner of this fishing vessel, who sits in the board in this Russian organization that has this fishing vessel. And obviously, that man doesn't know that. So he calls up who in the Greenlandic government? Who is he calling to get these advice? What department is the experts? Who is the leading experts in Greenland? What department is the leading experts on the current EU-Ukraine sanctions for a company?
I wouldn't call it. That's not how we call it. We don't call it experts. What we we do.
Who do
is,
I ask for guidelines?
Who has the competence or responsibilities within these matters? So right now, if you go take a step back, there are a number of sanction packages that we have to look at, and we are looking a little bit at. Not all of these sanctions are relevant in a Greenlandic sphere. Some of these sanctions about weapon technology, that is not relevant for Greenland. Some of it is about the exports of metals or irons, not relevant for Greenland in the case of iron, as we do not extract or sell iron. So there are a number of these sanctions that are not that relevant to us, but we'll assess them one by one. Then there's a list of oligarchs and important people in Russia and entities with more than 1,000 people and entities. Of course, here we go in contact with the Danish authorities, as they have better channels than we do in trying to find out ownership structures within certain companies and what have you. Right now, a fishing vessel in your water is not against the sanctions. There has been a common conception or notion that it was, but it's not.
But adding fuel on a fishing vessel and getting payments from the transaction.
It can go into the docks. How much of transactions you can do, I'm not into those details, but you can go into the docks, and it's not just to sit and wait and breathe. I mean, it can't be. It can sit there, and that is one of the discussions you have right now in the Faroe Islands. Then there are discussions, and seafood is also not part of the sanctions. So you have to really go into the nitty-gritty of the details, and we have to look at the different sanctions, assess whether or not this is relevant for us or not, or if it's something that's under Danish competence, and Denmark then should have come into effect including Greenland, or if we should start the process for this sanction itself. Because again, with the limited resources we have, we do not just take it one huge block, because that will create a lot of work. So we have to pick the right ones that are relevant.
And then
I don't know what you try to do there, Mads. If you try to scare everybody who sees a Russian fishing vessel, that's probably wise, because it will cause trouble these days. But you should also. I mean, we should. They are technically complicated, but there's also some protection against, let's say, innocent people who suddenly put fuel on a trawler and then afterwards find out it's owned by Mr. Sachin or something. I mean, there has to be some kind of reasonable linkage for reasonably intellectual people to see in order for you to actually be punished for breaking sanctions. It's, of course, always wise to seek the advice of who is responsible, and they will do something. That's, of course, also a wise move. But don't think you get punished because you happen to look at the Russian
You won't
trawler,
get punished, but the discussion in Norway right now, where I live, is that it's very, very difficult for the companies to navigate in this. And it's difficult to
Yeah, sure. That's why the good advice is to ask
we have
somebody.
the discussion on cruise ships and all that, and that's a complex thing. It's not easy to go in and see all these structures. But we've had the question on what if a fishing vessel comes into trouble and needs help in our waters? Then we'll go and help, because that's what we are about. Basically, we have to follow international law and common decency, because that's what we stand for, and that's what we are against in what is happening down in Russia, Ukraine. So we have to hold up some standards that are higher, and which were in effect actually before February here, especially in the Arctic.
I would like, and please come in with the contribute with any questions you have. The same question to both of you. Never let a crisis go to waste. Right now, there's a crisis in one way or another in the Arctic collaboration. the Arctic community. You got the Sami Council excluding their, cousins from working. You got a pause in the Arctic Council and so on. Is there anything good coming out of this situation? Any positives to take away from this situation when it comes to Arctic collaboration? I'm not talking about, the whole world, but like in the Arctic family. Thomas?
We get to know our colleagues from 6 other states very well.
Yeah, it's difficult in this case because what keeps coming into your mind is the pictures from in Ukraine. So it's very serious, of course. Yeah. But if I am to come with something, then it is that the allies stand quite strongly together, and that has placed people a bit, or states a bit more closer to each other. And of course, we have noticed that our allied friends have noticed that we have taken this position. And hopefully this means that we'll be able to have more cooperation with the US, Canada, and UK. Where we, especially with Canada and the US, think that there's room for improvement. Absolutely. So if anything good is coming from this, then it is that neighbors and allies start to work closer with each other.
Do you think that this crisis could lead to more investments in Greenland for one reason or another? Satellites or ships? Or?
Let's see. We've been talking about potentials for decades and important things and so forth, possibilities. Sometimes they happen, sometimes they don't. What happens if the crisis and war stops in 2 or 3 weeks and out of the blue there's a regime change? Then suddenly again we go back to the old geopolitical picture, if that happened within a month or 2.
Did it change anything in your work with the Greenland security strategy, defense strategy? Did it change anything, the situation with Ukraine and Russia? Like, did you have to move any paragraphs or change any lines?
I think we saw the first development perhaps a little bit earlier than that. With the announcement in Denmark on the Arctic capability package, that suddenly got the Greenlandic system, Greenlandic politicians out of the chair and said, "Oh, stop here. You're talking about the Arctic and you haven't even involved us. We're the Arctic part of the state or the kingdom, and you haven't even talked with us." So suddenly we saw something on security and defense where that has traditionally, to a large extent, been something where we said, okay, unquestionably something that's Denmark's competence. And it still is, but we now say that on security and defense, we now speak on behalf of the Greenland people when it comes to policies like that. And of course, when it then came to Russia, Ukraine later on, I think it was also important for Denmark, correct me if I'm wrong, to see that both Faroe Islands and Greenland took their own positions, took their own decisions on this matter.
Did that make things easier, or that Greenland and the Faroe Islands took their own positions on these matters?
We welcomed it warmly. I mean, it's so. I don't think we can use the word easier. I mean, there's no doubt that Copenhagen, as was expressed, but everybody was very pleased by the decisions taken in Nuuk and Tórshavn, definitely.
So I think that was an example of where information was shared, and a lot of talk between us happened. Quite a bit of it, of course, confidential and so forth, but it happened.
That's what all the politicians were speaking about on stage. This is in real life, so they were talking about all of this, but it actually happens right now.
Yeah, one thing is, of course, you get the same information. You can have different perspectives. We have the Nuuk perspective, there's a Tórshavn perspective, there's a Copenhagen perspective. But in some instances, some cases, you will reach the same conclusion if you have access to the same information.
in a year, Norway is going to take over the chairmanship of the Arctic Council. They will have the chairmanship for 2 years, and then the Kingdom of Denmark, and then Sweden will go on. So that's maybe not like-minded or closest allies, but it's definitely it's a
Isn't it? 6 years Nordic bliss.
it's a Nordic bliss in the Arctic Council. How is that transition? How is the coordination with Sweden, with Norway, and for the kingdom? I mean, is it going to be like a thread, like a common line throughout those 6 years, or how does that work?
I think it will be typically Nordic that we all have our own, or will have our own priorities, and we will all promote our own issues. And of course, for the kingdom, these will be worked out together with Nuuk and Tórshavn. So that's what we do, each of the states. But then we will have projects, hopefully, that will be for all 6 years. I don't know what it will be, but there are definitely something that, because we are very like-minded. And I think even if it sounds to many, including myself, a bit boring, I think sort of the administrative, financial parts of the Arctic Council, if you get 6 years of Nordic chairmanship fixing this or improving this, that could be an issue, but it's not something I know, it's just an example. So we didn't get any further than just exchange some words with Norway and Sweden saying we should cooperate, and everybody agreed on that, and then we had the invasion of Ukraine, and we are sort of in a different place. But it will be a close Nordic cooperation in the usual way with both national and common interests.
And will there be a ministerial meeting in a year in the Arctic Council? Do you think that's realistic as the situation is right now?
If the situation is the same now, in a year, there will not be a ministerial meeting. I mean, again, that I cannot see this happen. But of course, the brilliant diplomatic and legal minds of all the states must find a way of transferring the chairmanship within the sort of the framework of the Arctic Council. But if the situation is changed, I doubt it will be a ministerial. But as you said, I mean, who knows what things can happen fast. I personally don't think they will happen that fast. So I don't think anybody and luckily the Ottawa Declaration that founded the Arctic Council says, as a general rule, we have a ministerial every 2 years. So we are not under any obligation to have a ministerial.
So there will be a transition of.
There will be a transition, yes.
There's a question in the far back. I think we got a microphone there, so if you're just patient, then the microphone will come up. Also, if any of you got any questions for any of the party chairmen, then it's also your opportunity.
Hi. In my understanding, Greenland is not an active member, but merely a bystander in the Arctic Council. And I wanted to hear your opinions on whether it would be better if Greenland became an active member of the Arctic Council, or whether it should stay a bystander, and why.
That's for you, I guess, Meningorg.
There's a lot of politics involved in that, but right now, as the situation is, Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. This summer, during the meetings between the Prime Minister and the three Prime Ministers of the Kingdom, it was decided that, or agreed upon, that Greenland speaks first, signs the declarations, and also is on the photos, of course, and the ministerials. This is a development. It's not everything we want, but we are in a kingdom. Right now, the members of the Arctic Council are states, and as long as that status is as it is, then I think the ball is on our court, and it's up to the Greenland people and the political system to decide whether or not one wants to pursue that ball. And I think politically there is a general will to go that way. When it will happen is another discussion.
I don't know if you agree, Meningorg. I don't see Greenland as a bystander.
No, I don't see
I mean, I agree that formally you can do that. But I think, again, in real life, as I started out saying, Greenland is not a bystander.
We're very much an integral part of it. Is it our own name that is shown? No, that is true. It's not our own name. Do we sit with two others in our delegation? Yes, that is true. But we also experience that our views are also listened to more. And I also suspect that other countries in the Arctic Council can sense the Greenlandic voice within the Kingdom of Denmark's voice.
And dig a bit down. I mean, if you look at the head of delegation of the Kingdom of Denmark delegation to the CAF working group of the Arctic Council, she is an employee of a Greenlandic ministry. And even if it just say Kingdom of Denmark, her title will also be from the Ministry of Environment of Greenland. So there are many places where you can, if you want to look for the name Greenland, it will be there.
And I would say in my organization that is mirroring the Arctic Council, we have been very open for any Greenlandic members, business companies, to join the Arctic Economic Council, and they will have exactly an equal seat compared to any other company, and they will have the same voting rights. I mean, it will be, it's quite a, but it's also, you know, we talked about this, how much is the interest, how much are you going to force it down people's throats, and how much you're going to take it, and it's an evolution in many ways.
Yeah. It is something where it as things are now, it's a political movement that happens. Would I have more? Of course I would have more. Would I have it as maybe what's behind your question, that we have our own? Yes, of course. Will it happen? I think it will, but it takes time. And right now we are in the construction that we have to try to make work. Otherwise we don't get our interests through.
We have another question. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to ask you what the role is for Jacob Ismussen to be in China.
What? Yeah.
So the representation in China.
Yeah.
You know, what was the background? What was the thinking about that representation?
Now he is now in Beijing. He opened the Greenland representation to China. He is there mainly on trade-related matters. And of course promoting our interests within trade. So and he came there I think in October, November. Now COVID has made things a bit challenging for him in Beijing and China, but he has been busy with opening the representation, all the practicalities about that, but he has also worked on examples, Greenlandic shipments where the Chinese authorities said there were COVID in them, where he had to go and say, together with Danish representatives but also Faroese, and work it out, and so that our shipments could get through, or try to, make things go smoother. He meets with government agencies and so forth, make ourselves known. I think basically has the same role as Inuit Holm Olsen had in Washington, D.C. the first few years, to make Greenland known. And that is one of the things he has to do. And then, of course, safeguarding the trade, our trade interests. So one thing is, of course, I've been sitting here talking about more trade with allies. Yeah? China is not part of the Western alliance, but we trade with China. So does Denmark, so does the EU, so does the US. So we do have a challenge, yes, but they buy our fish food. And is it an easy situation? No. But we should also not stop talking and trading at all, because then we have a completely deglobalized, sectionized world. But we should also try to develop in a way where we trade more with our friends. And that is what is right now a huge need. We have nothing with Canada, basically, nothing with the US, very little with the US. And we're trying to safeguard the UK. And then, of course, China is the biggest market for us right now. It is what it is.
We have one final question, and then I will give the two gentlemen the opportunity to round up. So the final question for Andreas in the back. Or maybe we'll two final questions. One from Michael, one from Andreas. So we'll take them both. You will answer them, and then we'll finish. So Michael.
Michael with the Embassy of Canada in Copenhagen, responsible for trade collaboration with the Kingdom of Denmark. Noted the question on whether Canada will be opening an office in Nuuk, and intrigued by the possibility that Canada could be included for Greenland, and I think that speaks to the opportunity for collaboration. And also want to point out my collaboration with the colleagues of the Trade Council to have a wonderful delegation from Northern Canada here to explore business collaboration with Greenland. And I think my question then speaks to looking at the challenges and opportunity in the Arctic. We've heard a lot about the Arctic Council, we've heard a lot about what the Arctic states are doing. What's the role of the private sector in keeping the Arctic an area of high cooperation and low tension?
So we'll keep that. So the role of the private sector in Arctic collaboration. Andreas?
Yes, thank you. Andreas Krogh, I'm a Danish journalist. I have a question for Mr. Kleist. Listening to your presentation, I was wondering, does the Danish constitution still apply for Greenland? Because it sounds like you're challenging more and more and more the paragraph in the constitution that says that the foreign policy is run from Copenhagen. So I was just wondering, are you still recognizing that there's a constitution for the whole kingdom?
I think, Miningwag, is if you're happy that you got 4 minutes to answer these two very easy questions about the... So let's start with the private sector, and then we'll do the constitution.
Private sector, of course, if the government of Greenland wants to enter into a trade agreement with Canada, and there's absolutely no interest from private sector, then of course it's a waste of time. So what we first have to do is to try to see on both sides, is there an interest and an appetite, and what are the perspectives? I think in this case, perspectives will be important because we don't have that much trade. But maybe you don't have to do a full-fledged trade agreement from day one, but something step by step, because a full-fledged, as we're doing with the UK, that's quite some work. That's no joke. So private sector gets communities, countries closer to each other. Makes it, of course, can be a source for conflict, but fundamentally makes it more difficult to go into conflict with each other because you both have stakes. So it's important that two countries cooperate more. Greenland with Canada, Greenland with Nunavut, Northwest Territories, what have you, Quebec. So, yes. So on the Constitution, I will always challenge the Constitution, always. The Constitution was never put to a referendum up here. We had basically 2 days or 3 days for our country council to decide whether or not we should be part of the kingdom. So the democratic process you had in Denmark, you never had up here. But it keeps the kingdom together. And it keeps the kingdom as a platform, or as some sort of platform. I recognize that. That is what we cooperate on top of, basically. Where it becomes a little bit tiresome, or that is especially where I would like, as a person who works within these spheres, where I would like to, or where we say, wait a minute, I think you're using this article a little bit restrictive, or perhaps too restrictive. Because when you say foreign affairs is a matter for the kingdom or the state, then look at Self-Government Act, that all the areas we have competence over, we can enter into agreements with other countries. We can talk with them. We can cooperate. We can sign with them. And of course, we can also coordinate on those matters internally in Greenland. Now, I cannot make a legal act within foreign affairs. I cannot put forward a piece of Greenlandic legislation on foreign affairs. That is Thomas's competence. Now there I place what I can and what I cannot and what he can. But on setting the voice of setting the voice of the Greenland people, or representation of the Greenland people, within the preamble of the Self-Government Act, it states that we have been recognized as a people pursuant to international law with the right to self-determination. That means you can also set your own policies, also in foreign affairs. And before, as we were talking about earlier on, security and defense was a matter for the state. We stopped the process in the Danish parliament without competences on the matter because we have an opinion. And we are pushing the limits. Home rule, you pushed along the way to the Danish constitution. Self-government, you push along the way. That's how you create progress. I'm not creating a crisis, I'm creating evolution together with my colleagues. And with all the trust and cooperation we have between our countries, we have also, as we saw earlier today, heard today, areas where we have not the best circumstances between us, and areas where we do not always think I get the right piece of information from my colleagues. And them on me, of course. They work for Denmark, I work for Greenland. And that is how it is. But we're colleagues, and you see us talk and cooperate. Sometimes we can shout at each other, and other times we can have a beer.
I apologize we didn't get a shouting session. There might have been more entertainment.
Yeah. But yes, the Constitution lays the foundation for the Kingdom of Denmark. It does. But can I challenge it? Yes, I can. Because it's not something that sets out all the details. And I think my job is to push things for the people of Greenland, for their interests.
Meningor Kleist, you got the opening remarks, so I will give your colleague the closing remarks. So, Thomas,
well, I don't have much to add. I think the question of the role of private companies is an interesting one. You can ask Mads afterwards. I mean, I
have a lot more to say about that.
Yeah, we know. Don't do that now. The Arctic Economic Council is an attempt to get the companies of the Arctic to work together. And I must say, the first time I was at a joint meeting of the Arctic Council and the Arctic Economic Council, I didn't understand at least what you were doing. But then I went into a room when somebody was suddenly talking about connectivity in the Arctic, and where there's been a mapping with the inclusion of private companies, and where the states suddenly got very interested because it showed where you had the gaps in the connectivity in the Arctic, and that created some both state and private activity. So there is a point in having the private companies on board as well. And then I want to make absolutely sure that nobody thought that I meant our general consul in Toronto did anything wrong. Quite the contrary. I actually think our general consulate in Toronto and the embassy in Ottawa, those who are really working very closely with the Greenlanders, including for the big PDAC conference, and now with the delegation together with the Canadian embassy in Copenhagen from northern Canada coming here. So you did absolutely right. I think you're the ones who knows when to call us when there are things going in strange direction, and I think that will be my final note.
Thank you very much. Please give a round of applause to Ingvar and Thomas. Thank you very much.